Hey everyone, Real Talk with Randy, episode 10 here. I know we've been on a short break, but I've got a really cool subject to talk about today. So I've invited Drew from CulturePop here to share a little bit more about what CulturePop is and how we've been leveraging it as our main DE&I tool to drive our own internal initiatives around those topics. So welcome, Drew. Thanks for joining. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, good to meet you and see you again, Randy. My name's Drew Bartkiewiczan. I'm one of the co-founders of CulturePop. And just brief history, graduated from West Point, was in the military for 5 years, served overseas, and was the +1 in Italy, served combat tour in Iraq, came back and became enamored with software, left the military and began a career in software. So great to be with everyone today, and particularly you, Randy. A couple of years ago, we developed CulturePop as a way to use software to really grow curiosity within a specific culture. So if you're in a manufacturing company, the amount of curiosity you want to cultivate and the amount of inclusivity there is very different than, let's say, an accounting company, or let's say a professional football team. The inclusive index for every organization is different, and we started to work with AVERRO a couple of years ago by our CultureCube services and then the CulturePop app, both of which I'm happy to talk about today.
For sure. Well, let me start, by saying thank you for your service. And, we're a veteran-owned business, and, supporting veterans and partnering with veterans is very important to us. So thank you for everything. So tell me more, like what is this CulturePop? You set an app, you talked about CultureCube, and of course I know all this stuff, but, shed some light on what that actually is.
Yeah, sure thing. So the learning behaviors for most people today have really migrated from the learning behaviors that I grew up with. So I grew up with high touch, low frequency, which meant you had to kind of learn on your own. And today the frequency is just the opposite. Today it's high frequency, low touch, right? The mobile device has become this spectrum by which we can learn an infinite amount of things. And one of the things that we thought was learnable and in fact really interesting was diversity. And if you could teach diversity in a class, like a college setting, or you could teach it in a workshop in a corporate setting, how could you activate DEI learning on the fly, where people learn it almost as naturally as having a cup of coffee in the morning? And that's really the genesis of CulturePop. We launched the app as Diversity Pop to bring diversity information out in a micro learning environment. And what we learned through our customers was that being a part of a culture was kind of your key to understanding diversity. And that's when we put the app out there on iOS, then Android. And we have two operating systems simultaneously. One is microlearning. So there's the learning axes on the app. And then there's also the micro engagement surveys, polls, and commitments we call pledges that people can participate in. So it's not just learning in on an island, but you're learning as part of an organization, which means people can interact on these topics in a much more free-form environment. And because the app's anonymous, people can learn without kind of fear of being wrong on a subject. So that's how CulturePop began and how it functions today.
Yeah, that's super cool. And I like to kind of compare it to like the TikTok for learning, right? You can learn life hacks and this, that, or the other thing on TikTok, but it's the micro learning component just resonates so much better with kind of where we're at in this day and age, right? All right.
Yeah,
cool.
Absolutely.
What about this CultureCube thing you talked about? What's that?
Yeah. So we kind of have three customer types out there. One customer knows exactly what they want to do, and they want CulturePop to accelerate that in a continuous learning environment. So that's customer type one. Customer type two is kind of unsure of where to start their DEI initiatives, where to start micro learning. And that's kind of where we developed CultureCube. CultureCube is a fast start program that lets a company really, in a way, index very quickly those kind of key components of the cube. And we use a metaphor like the cube to kind of help companies visualize that culture has many surfaces. And so your culture may be very strong on community, but maybe very weak on collaboration. It may be very strong on conversation, but very weak on competence. So the 6 C's of the cube, we refer to the 4 C's are curiosity, competence, curiosity, competence, community, and conversation, the 4 C's. And the 2 engines that really drive how a company grows those competencies is through engagement and learning. So the CultureCube service is something we do in roughly 30 days. We engage a company. We get a baseline of how they're performing on those 4 C's. And then we give them what we call a culture flow, a roadmap to understand how to leverage microlearning engagement to grow key areas of their culture. So CultureCube is the service, and CulturePop is the software that runs the service infinitely. Frankly, you could keep, there's nothing about DEI that you'll ever know 100% of. And that's the beauty of CulturePop. The more it spins, the more the Rubik's Cube moves, the more you start to see perhaps biases, blind spots, and stereotypes that you once thought you knew, but actually there's this fascinating world of the diversity wheel that we unlock through software. And that's what the 2 services are all about.
Very cool. Very cool. And you create these benchmarks and indexes through like anonymous surveys to the employees, right? So you're like getting real legit raw data and compiling it into like meaningful and actionable data points, that leadership or DEI committees can use to build strategy around,
That's
speaking
right.
from personal experience, right?
That's right.
Which is huge.
Yeah.
For sure.
The online portion of the tool is kind of the lowest lever participation. And that's a company type 3 that's not sure they want a strategy, not sure they need one, but they want to get a sense of what's their belonging bonus in their company. Do they even have a high belonging measurement? And the belonging bonus is for that company that doesn't know where to start, doesn't know if they even want to do DEI. And the belonging bonus is that very quick assessment tool to give them a sense of what their index looks like relative to an average. And then from there, they're either shocked and dismayed or they're euphoric and exuberant. Rarely they're the latter.
Yeah, it's been a journey.
Belonging. Yeah,
it's been a journey for us over 2 years. And I think that's a perfect segue into my next question for you, which is like, what kind of results has this engagement produced for us, AVERRO?
Yeah. So, AVERRO has 2 really strong leaders in Mary Beth and Chad, and Chad as their CEO and Mary Beth, who really does their people development. We found 2 really very strong stakeholders there. And that's where it really starts. You have to have leadership that wants to follow through on improving culture, right? It's probably the most valuable thing to employees, but also the thing that most employees are most cynical about, ironically, because they're afraid it's kind of a flavor of the month, or this will die out in 3 months and we'll do something else. And to Chad and Mary Beth's credit, they really stuck with it, asking the hard questions and getting raw results up front in terms of how the company did in these areas of the CultureCube. So their results started out, I would say, really favorable for a company of roughly 180 employees. By the time they really went through the process, and then a year later, they remeasured the results. They had, just in terms of positive indices, their highest indice we found was that they had a very strong culture of curiosity and a very strong culture around conversation. And those are 2 key parts. That's like people can speak freely. People want to learn. That's the curiosity component. And then what we saw over the span of the year, their weakness that they had, frankly, the lowest aspect was the ability for learning, that the company didn't make it easy for employees to learn valuable things easily and quickly. It was kind of partitioned out like training. And if you made time for training, good for you. But if not, so what we did is we just unlocked the training and we brought it to people through CulturePop and made these learnable pathways something people could do on a train, on a bus, at the office, and in 15 to 20 minutes, kind of learn a perspective about Indigenous Americans, or learn a perspective about microlearning, or a perspective about leadership, and add it to their growing micro curriculum around DEI. And AVERRO is just a great example of two leaders that want to improve the culture, and then the culture responds. And the employees really were the most instrumental part of the year two, because they really started to own the culture themselves. And that's what you really want in any organization.
Yeah, yeah. And we've even taken it a level further, right? And where, we go through these pathways, or, we go through a series of these micro learning, topics, and then we get together for like small group discussion. Like, what did you take away from that piece of learning? And so that we can understand everybody's perspective coming in and ensure that we're all aligned on what the takeaways are. And then, the other component that I really appreciate about, the app itself and the micro learning style about it is you kind of gamified it too, right? You get awards, you have badges, you can progress, and so you can kind of compete with others in learning, which you don't really get that often, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's designed to use all the tools of mobile addictions, right? And so a lot of times mobile addictions are used for algorithms to spark an addiction to entertainment. Like you mentioned, TikTok, very entertaining. And they want to lock you into actually not think, but just browse and watch. And that's perfectly fine. I look at TikTok as like the Gong Show today of the mobile world. You never know what you'll get. However, you can really pass a colossal amount of hours on entertainment. You can move quickly from minutes to hours. But what we did is we understood that the behavior of scrolling full screen with identifiers on the bottom, animation, music, these are things we brought into CulturePop as well. So while we may not have the spectacle or the salacious nature of TikTok videos, we have our own DEI micro videos that really will apply to that user type. And there are folks who love to watch their way to learn. That's the CulturePop videos. There's people who like to listen their way to learning. That's our CulturePop podcasts. And then there's other people, perhaps myself, a little old school, like to read their way to learning. And that's the featured content. And we try and personalize based on behaviors of the person without actually knowing who the person is. And that's probably the biggest difference of CulturePop and a TikTok is we personalize without ever profiling. We'll never know a phone number and email address, but that gives people a safe space to learn, grow, participate on their score, participate in surveys, earn badges, but never call them out as, scoring 72% on gender identity index, right? Just you're there to learn, not to be shamed.
Right. Yeah. And I appreciate, the anonymous component to it. I think you guys built a great tool. We've been using it for about 2 years, and it's created super positive impact for not only, our learning and education and just kind of self-growth, but, in our culture in a healthy way. Like I've noticed, as a leader in our organization, like we've come together more closely. We have more open dialogue of communications, and I even built what I like a leadership skills building program where I pulled, CulturePop pathways
Great.
for some of my, budding leaders.
Perfect.
And went through that with the small group discussion, and it created a big impact. So you guys are onto something, Drew, for sure. We love partnering with you. I greatly appreciate, you volunteering and joining me today on this episode. And any closing thoughts?
No, just it's been a pleasure to get to know everyone at AVERRO and the tag group there. You really are doing something special, and we just feel very privileged to be able to provide you with this service. And as Chad and Mary Beth keep pushing us to think of new ideas and new features and new interactions for the app, we're always grateful. It's only a great product and service if people want it year over year. So a pleasure to just speak to you today. Thanks for the time to talk about CulturePop, and hopefully your viewers get a chance to learn more about your company and your programming. And great to just speak with you today. Thank you.
For sure. Yeah, no doubt, Drew. So for all of you, the audience out there, I'll drop a link to the CulturePop website and a link to Drew's LinkedIn profile as well, if you want to connect with him or learn more about, this, and feel free to reach out to me personally if you would like more detail around, our engagement with this group and tool. I'd be happy to share. So that then concludes, our episode today. Thank you all for joining and viewing. We will talk to y'all in a few weeks.